So the speakers we have today are Aviva Kutnick from USAID, Rachel Lambert from DFID, and Parasto from the AgResults Secretariat, which is the implementing organization. And I will just hand over to Aviva to begin the webinar.
Great, thank you, Mike. Again, I am Aviva Kutnick, and coming from USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, currently serving as the donor chairperson for the AgResults Donor Steering Committee. And we're very pleased to be joining the Beam Exchange today for this discussion. I'll go over some high-level goals for the webinar. First, we aim to look deeply at the AgResults initiative and how the prize competition model functions. Then we hope to examine some of the benefits of the use of prizes to address development challenges in the food security and agriculture space, as well as how prizes can be used as a tool in market system transformation. Then we'll hand it over to my colleague on the AgResults Secretariat, Parasto, to delve into two examples of prizes, one taking place in West Africa in Nigeria, and the other in East Africa in Uganda. And then last but definitely not least, Rachel Lambert from DFID, another AgResults donor chairperson, or former donor chairperson of the committee and current donor committee member, will reflect on evaluation and learning during the AgResults initiative. So AgResults is an $147 million multi-donor initiative. We use a pay-for-results methodology, setting prize competitions out directed to private sector commercial actors that are working in an agriculture, animal health, or food security value chain or industry. And we seek to target and aim these prizes to address some fundamental market imperfection or challenge that existing or almost ready agriculture technologies or innovations can address if smallholder farmers have access. So we hope to, all of the prizes either have the explicit aim to improve food security, improve household nutrition and health, or increase livestock productivity that would benefit the household economics or food security nutrition status. AgResults is, as I mentioned, a multi-donor initiative, so it's supported by the government of Australia, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Government of Canada, UKAID, DFID, USAID, and the trustee of the fund is the World Bank. The theory of change for AgResults essentially is if we have appropriate incentives for private sector actors, these private sector actors will make fundamental and transformative changes in the market system that when the prize or incentive ends, is taken away, those changes will persist because they will have been profitable for those companies in the absence of the prize. And then more goods and services will be available to smallholder farmers, markets will be expanded, et cetera. So that's a bit on the AgResults generally and the theory of change. Now let's look at the prize competition model and approach. So as I've mentioned, we're really setting forth this idea that a discrete pocket change purse of money kind of as a carrot kind of dangled towards private sector actors would incentivize some significant change or approach in the market. Our contests are really designed to spur systemic change. So we're looking at, and I think one of the key points here is that these prizes are directed to commercial actors that are already in the value chain. So it's not a prize that's available to anybody who wants to, we set a target, let's say, in animal health delivery, and anyone in the world would be able to participate. But rather, there's a certain gateway of entry that folks that are eligible for the prize are already delivering goods and services to our intended beneficiaries or the market actors we're trying to impact. And then kind of third element of the model or approach is that we have an emphasis on learning and valuation. And this is important in two respects. We have an independent evaluation that sits concurrently to all of the prizes, which colleague Rachel Lambert from DFID will go into during the presentation a bit later. And we're also, throughout implementation of the prizes, gathering on-time information and evidence that we use then to tweak prize implementation and sometimes prize amount, which is important in terms of the flexibility of the prize mechanism and our adaptation, the way we can adapt while a prize is running. Looking quickly at the geographic distribution of our prizes, we see we have prizes in Africa, Nigeria, Uganda, which we'll go into in a bit more depth during this presentation. We have a prize in Kenya for on-farm storage, hermetically sealed bags and small silos that farmers or other producers would use to store on-farm produce that they're growing. We have a prize in Vietnam on greenhouse gas emission reduction, and a prize in Zambia on biofortified maize. We also have two global prizes, both in animal health. One is in the foot and mouth disease project, and another which is brand new, just coming online, and another which is ongoing on helping to develop a brucellosis vaccine that would be targeted towards sheep and goats that are primarily held by smallholders. Now let's take a look at some of the benefits of an AgResults prize model. So we can look at three main kind of takeaways when examining how to use prize competitions in food security development programming. The first looks at well-designed prizes can fundamentally alter the relationship between commercial actors and smallholder farmers, producers, suppliers into whatever supply chain or industry. So this fundamentally looks at incentives, right? So there's commercial actors already working in a certain industry, and it's how the prize can provide that additional incentive to reach this perhaps geographically expensive market to reach, or perhaps there aren't, perhaps it's more expensive to reach small scale producers of a certain product to supply into a chain. So the idea of the short-term, limited-term prize would be to change the monetary incentive for a firm to be able to reach those more expensive to serve clients in the short run. The second takeaway is that the prize really seeks an agnostic solution. So often we're putting out a prize with a hard target. So we want to see a certain amount of sales increased to smallholder farmers or sourcing a certain product from smallholder producers with a very specific target in mind, but we don't dictate how a firm would do that. So it's very much in that kind of agnostic, we're agnostic to how the commercial actors would achieve the prize target. So in that way, it's very facilitative. So we're not inserting ourselves as an actor in the value chain, but we're just saying, okay, we think that this prize or this would be this much money. If that incentive is attractive to commercial actors, then they'll make those changes to realize not only the prize, but entry into that market space. The third takeaway is that if a prize does not lead to results, it can still offer us learning opportunities and, in fact, is program saving. So in this way, if for whatever reason we've done a lot of our due diligence, we've designed our prize, but it just simply isn't, the actors and the commercial actors aren't able to reach the target, it's signaling something. Either we were too optimistic, perhaps the incentive amount is not correct, perhaps there's other fundamental things in the system, policy, regulatory, other market imperfections that are actually a bigger challenge than the incentive that we've designed. And so in this way, the third takeaway is really akin to the prize being flexible and also being part of a constant kind of learning and adaptation model connected to the prize itself. Let's delve into the first benefit a bit more, which is that a well-designed prize can fundamentally alter the smallholder private sector relationship. So in this way, prizes can strengthen relationships between market actors. Here there's a real important focus on commercial actors. So again, I mentioned the prize here is, we put the prize out, and it's not to a single actor, but it's to many companies that are within a certain industry or commercial space, and all of them have the opportunity to compete with themselves or between themselves or compete collectively to achieve the results in order to gain the prize. But more so, more important than achieving the prize or earning the incentive itself, really the thing that's going to sustain their participation or those relationships with smallholder producers, suppliers, or consumers in the marketplace is that their transactions will be ultimately revenue generating and hopefully profitable for that commercial firm. And then it'll keep them in the market. It'll sustain that relationship between the private sector firm and the smallholder producers or customers. So in this way, the prize is a tool to strategically partner with commercial actors already in the system, and it facilitates that strengthening of relationships between farmers and commercial entities. Delving a bit more into benefit number 2, which is that agnostic solutions can incentivize results at scale through innovation, crowding in of competitors, and results-based goals. So let's take a look. There's a few bullets here, which you can see. Let's look at the last bullet, which is that prize structure eliminates the obligation to pick winners. So here's an interesting one for lots of development practitioners who do seek to partner strategically with private sector actors. So the prize, because we set it out, setting a target, and then there's an even playing field for many commercial actors to compete, we actually are able to use it as a private sector engagement tool, but without targeting a specific lead firm or a single firm at first, but we're able to kind of build up maybe a thin market where there's only 1 or 2 actors. We're able to build that up to thicken that market a bit so there's multiple actors that can provide a good or service. So it eliminates that obligation to pick winners up front and kind of gives the option for many companies to kind of try different approaches. Again, we're not telling them how to achieve the goals. We're just saying this is the goal. If you reach it, you'll get this incentive. So it's kind of this double. We're able to work with multiple actors, and they're also able to innovate and figure out how they're going to reach that market with different approaches. So encouraging competition within. Prizes can also be designed in different ways. So we do have some prizes that are winner take all, but other prizes are proportional prizes. So there's a prize generally that all actors can compete for, and they would get a portion of depending on how many sales or how many smallholder farmers they reach depending on the prize structure. There's also prizes that are milestone or staged prizes or a combination. So we really try to structure the prize with the type of industry challenge and the type of industry that exists in mind. Now looking at benefit number 3, if a prize does not lead to results, it still offers learning opportunities and program savings that can be reprogrammed and used for different prizes. Set targets at the start of a prize and to set fair rules of the game so everyone has confidence and can participate on equal footing. Prizes also allow a certain flexibility in programming. As mentioned before, if no market actors are able to achieve the targets we set out, then it's a really good indication to us that the prizes were unrealistic or that there's another more important issue in the marketplace, maybe a cross-market function, finance, or a policy or a regulatory issue that's actually impeding the marketplace more than the issue of the cost of transactions that we would be subsidizing on a limited term basis and hopefully take off on its own. So we do have a few cases where our prizes commercial actors did not reach the targets, and we did not issue prizes, and we were able in the AgResults initiative then to save money from that prize competition and then reinvest it in another prize competition. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Parasto to delve into the examples of Nigeria and Uganda.
Thank you, Aviva. As Aviva mentioned, I'm going to go over two examples of projects. The first prize competition that I'm going to look at is the Nigeria Afterface Challenge project. This is a 5-year competition that incentivizes the private sector to work with actors such as smallholder farmers to adopt Afterface. Afterface is an input that reduces the level of aflatoxins in maize and groundnuts. We are providing a per unit price premium to maize aggregators and grain traders for each metric ton of high Afterface maize produced by smallholder farmers. In the initial years of the prize competition, we saw a small number of competitors joining and only adopting a small amount of Afterface. They really wanted to come in and test the input before rolling it out on a larger scale. Over the first 2 years, we saw this testing period, and slowly we saw that the initial competitors started investing in improving their business models to work with more farmers and increase their profits, as well as increase the premiums that they're receiving on the market. Slowly we saw the project expanding and bringing new competitors joining the project. Each year they offered varied solutions to their smallholder farmers. We saw them offering input packages, different bundles so that the smallholder farmers were not only using Afterface, but also increasing their amount of maize that they were growing. Over the years, we've seen that the competitors are creating a new market, and they're working to change the enabling environment to increase aflatoxin awareness. They've been coming together to try to lobby for new policies so that there are levels of aflatoxin and aflatoxin control. We've seen a lot of evidence of the markets changing in Nigeria. The early competitors, as I mentioned, were cautious to adopt Afterface. But over the last couple of years, we've seen a crowding in of competitors where the private sector and smallholder farmers are seeing an economic incentive of adopting Afterface. The prize structure has further incentivized competitors to take the product to scale. As I've mentioned, they've invested in inputs in addition to Afterface. So not only were they trying to reduce aflatoxin levels, but also increase the amount of maize produced overall. Next, the verification process that we've adopted to test whether or not Afterface is prevalent in the maize that's aggregated has also been a seal of approval and a level of certification of the quality of the maize being produced. This has helped competitors not only sell on the domestic market, but also reach out to international buyers to market their Afterface treated maize. Finally, the private sector saw commercial potential and began lobbying efforts to motivate the public sector to set policies to really further the development of the market of Afterface treated maize and reduce aflatoxin levels. Next, I'm going to look at an example in Uganda. The Uganda Legumes Seeds Challenge Project was a 6-year prize competition that incentivized private sector seed companies to produce and sell quality legume seeds to smallholder farmers. This project was designed to incentivize the increased production of quality legume seeds above an 8% annual growth. This would trigger a prize, the prize threshold, and allow competitors to receive a prize premium. Unfortunately, this project ended up closing early due to enabling environment challenges. Also, there was lack of competition from the participants and the inability to verify the quality of seeds being produced. The environment was too complex for the project, and we really saw that the project wasn't working, and we were unable to identify an intervention point for an incentive for market change. One of the key pillars of the project was quality certification. We wanted to sell quality legume seeds on the market, but we were unable to identify a verification entity and could not overcome the verification challenges. Despite participation, we were unable to crowd in and bring in a number of competitors to participate. and the initial actors that joined the project really weren't incentivized to scale up and produce the quality legume seeds. However, in Uganda, we did see some positive aspects and benefits from the competition. Although we closed early, there was a rise in awareness of the need for quality certification, and there was a desire for quality legume seeds. Since the project has closed, the public and private sector key stakeholders are still working together to identify a way to certify and verify the quality of not only legume seeds, but seeds as a whole. Also, as Aviva had mentioned, closing the project early meant that we were able to reprogram funds elsewhere and not only try to focus on one project, but move those funds to a potentially successful project. Now I'll be handing over to Rachel Lambert to look at why learning is at the heart of AgResults.
Thank you, Parasto. So learning and evidence is very much at the heart of the AgResults agenda. And our real purpose is to test the effectiveness and the cost effectiveness of a mechanism that really departs from conventional approaches to market systems to development and conventional approaches to the uptake of technologies and scaling technologies. So learning is very much a core objective for all of us, and each part of the AgResults family, if you like, participates in that kind of learning agenda. But there are different aspects to it, and we do separate out the sort of monitoring side from the evaluation side. They have quite different functions and quite different players are involved in them. So I think Parasto mentioned the importance of verification. We have third-party independent verifiers within each project who measure the results and enable us to trigger the payments. So that's an integral part of each pilot, but it's not intended to measure either impact or cost effectiveness, or indeed to capture the kind of systemic change in markets that we're looking for. That's the function very much of the external evaluator. The external evaluation function has been built into the initiative right from the outset, and it's been an integral component of AgResults. So we've had the evaluator built into AgResults right from the beginning alongside the Secretariat who oversees and monitor implementation. So that we have got the design and the baselines right from the very outset of each project. And the external evaluator is really looking at the question, do the challenge projects produce the private sector behaviors or outcomes that we're looking for, and are those better or different to those which would be delivered without this pay for results incentive? So on that slide, you have a snapshot of some of the outputs that have already been produced and which are available on the website. The bottom one you'll see is the evaluation framework itself, and I'll come on to that in the next slide. The second one starts to pull out what we're learning about overcoming market failure from the use of these kind of financial incentives. And the third one is the Nigeria Afterface evaluation, and there's a very short policy brief which shares some of the evaluation findings from that and looks at the impact on both farmers and markets. So moving on to the next slide, this looks at the evaluation framework for the initiative as a whole. We employ a common evaluation framework across all of the AgResults prize competitions, applying economic theory to examine how each incentivizes the private sector to overcome market failures and to improve smallholder farmers' welfare. It also identifies the behavior of market actors that might impede or aid development impact on farmers. So that common evaluation framework allows us to compare across all of the prize competitions and to generalize the results and lessons learned. In all of the project evaluations, we use rigorous qualitative and quantitative data gathering and analytic methods to test these economic theory-driven hypotheses. So there are 7 common evaluation questions for each of the projects. At the farmer level, we look at the impact on smallholder uptake and on smallholder incomes. within the value chain, we look at private sector involvement in the development and the uptake of innovations. We look at their incentives and how that has changed their business model. We look at the consumer side and what's the impact on poor consumer demand. And then there are three cross-cutting questions which look at issues around sustainability, scalability, and cost-effectiveness, and what lessons can be learned for the design and implementation of pull mechanisms or pay-for-results mechanisms as a whole. Coming on to the final slide, AgResults is a novel approach. It is different from the way in which we've done business previously. It uses competitions, or the competitions are designed to overcome the obstacles impeding sustainable commercial markets for technologies. If the businesses achieve predefined results, they get a prize, and the intention is to motivate those businesses to invest in target markets to deliver the development outcomes we're looking at. As we've heard, AgResults offers some advantages over traditional conventional grant funding, and we think has the potential to drive market system development in agriculture, at least when it's designed carefully and implemented correctly. So we've heard how a well-designed prize can fundamentally alter the smallholder farmer private sector relationship by encouraging the private sector to adjust its business model by nudging it or triggering those changes. We've heard how agnostic solutions can incentivize results through innovation by crowding in different private sector players and by delivering results. And I think importantly for us as donors, it enables us to test out different ways to incentivize the private sector before we've actually committed the bulk of spending. So no results, no prize payments. Experimentation, learning and evidence is really at the core of what we do. Rigorous analysis and validation in the field is absolutely essential, and the external evaluation, we use that to gauge the effectiveness of the prize and measure those long-term systemic changes. So we've got 5 years of experience now with AgResults. It still feels like it's quite early days for us as an initiative, but we do have quite a lot of learning now being accumulated, and I think we are looking to do more, both in terms of new pilots, as Aviva has said. The foot and mouth disease one is the most recent one to be approved, and we're looking at others in the pipeline as well, but also thinking about how we can share the results with others and whether there's more that we can do to engage with others who are tackling these same problems and how we can share that experience. So we'd like to thank Beam Exchange for allowing us this opportunity to share the AgResults story with you as practitioners, and use that to highlight the potential for payment for results or prize financing to really stimulate and engage the private sector to deliver development impact at scale. We think that it's the time for us to start thinking about, are there opportunities to mainstream these sorts of incentives in other programs, and to think about extending the geographical reach of what we're doing to develop sustainable markets in areas which are underserved both by the private and by the public sector. I'll stop there and pass back to you, Mike. Many thanks to everyone. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and Parasto and Aviva. That was a very invigorating presentation, very succinct, very articulate, and I'm sure will generate a lot of questions. Now, if anyone who's been listening would like to post a question, I should have mentioned at the beginning that you can do that in the chat box at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Send your question to everybody so we can all see them, but I will pick a few of them as they come along to share with the speakers. We have about 25 minutes left, thanks to the punctuality of the speakers, so we've got plenty of time to have some very interesting conversations now, and that's very much what these webinars are all about. So let me begin with not a quick question, but a crucial question really, which was touched on by the speakers. The question came from one of the pre-registration forms, and the question is, what are the necessary conditions for a prize competition to be most effective? And I think, in addition to, as a sort of second part of that question, I think that there's an interesting question, associated question, which is, is there a risk that this kind of prize competition excludes us from tackling certain kinds of problems or challenges in development that are not amenable to this sort of approach? But first of all, let's try and understand what kind of approaches, what kind of conditions do make these kind of prize competitions work.
Hi, Mike. This is Parasto. Some of the necessary conditions that we've seen with these prize competitions are really, is there a conducive enabling environment for these types of projects? Is the market ready for us to come in? We've seen that sometimes when there's conflicting policies or, the market's just not ready for an incentive, it's a nascent market, these prize competitions can't really come in and motivate the private sector to invest they're taking a big risk. So we're seeing that a number of the projects have struggled, and the two projects that have inevitably closed, there was a lot of conflicting enabling environment constraints that they were facing. And it was a big leap for the private sector to either invest in a new verification structure or have to invest in a new product that was way outside of their business model. And so those are some of the biggest constraints that we've seen. So when we look at designing new projects, are we designing something where there's a conducive enabling environment, but also is this within the private sector's business model, that they're not really having to reach too far to be able to meet the needs of the project?
Could you tell us a little? Sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
So I was just going to add that I think that's right. I think the institutional and policy environment has been absolutely critical in all of the projects that we've been involved in. But I think does the potential demand exist, and does the potential supply exist as well? Has been kind of a key question that's come particularly out of the Zambia project, where I think it was difficult to find that single leverage point that Parasto has talked about, and we were dealing with both huge gaps on the demand and supply side simultaneously, and so perhaps the market was too challenging for that intervention at that specific time. And I think you also raised the question of is there a risk that we're excluded from tackling certain problems? I think these kind of mechanisms are, they're a really an important and valuable new addition to our toolbox. But what we're trying to figure out is under what conditions will they be most effective. And certainly we wouldn't advocate for these in every market and in every context. And I think that the challenge for us is to articulate specifically what kind of markets and technologies and approaches these sorts of mechanisms will be most valuable in. And I think we start to do that in some of the learning outputs that you'll see on the web, where we look at some of the questions that you might ask if you're designing a program that would help you make those decisions and decide whether this is the right tool for you.
Thank you, Rachel. That's very, very helpful. And just to flag up, so when you refer to the web, you're talking about the AgResults website, the address of which is on the slide in front of us. Is that right? That's right, agresults.org. And there's a learning library on the website, and there's a whole raft of materials from the Secretariat and from the evaluator there. So there's already some really valuable resources out there. Can I also ask you, or one of you, to elaborate a little bit more about the amount, the sort of the cost, the investment, the time and effort that goes into analysing market to work out, to predict whether they are going to be amenable to this kind of methodology, and also to design the right kind of prize, because I think you sort of your presentation slightly underplayed the sort of the talent and effort that has gone into finding the right interventions and in the right sort of context. And it would be useful to know what proportion of the program costs exactly are taken up with, if you like, that analysis, as opposed to the prizes themselves?
Hi, this is Aviva, so I'll give a shot at answering that fairly complex question. So it is the case that the design element of the prize is incredibly important and substantial. First, you have this multi-donor approach. So you have donors who have different or various kind of geographic or technology or topical areas of focus. So in a way, we're able to firstly sort of crowd in a number of very important development challenges to address. I know in the USAID research and development portfolio, we support a number of the development and field testing of technologies. And then AgResults, not just USAID-funded interventions, but generally, we do seek to understand where there's promising technologies, identify those technologies, and then see can we intervene in the marketplace with incentives to be able to scale those to really benefit smallholder producers or suppliers or customers. So we have like a multitude, a range of things first we look at, and then narrow it down to a specific geography and technology that we seek to really to scale. Then we go into some really deep value chain and market analysis. And so we have teams that go out on the ground, talk to commercial actors, development actors, policy, government folks. We do, several weeks of on the ground kind of fact-finding, compile our analytics, really do all the same things we would do for, maybe a more traditional push kind of value chain approach program to really understand is there a place in that market system that an incentive would be appropriate for, try to suss out and understand, are there systemic policy enabling environments or frankly other, maybe it's a local public funded issue that's going to actually impede the market that we really can't use an incentive to try to alter. I'm thinking about fertilizer subsidies or price floors in certain commodities that no matter what type of incentive we put out to the private sector, we really can't fundamentally alter that potentially publicly funded market distortion. So we then, during our process, we throw out a bunch of ideas because we know a prize won't work for them. But when we do find a particular topic, country where we do think a prize works, then what we do is we create a business case for a particular firm, and we're able to cost out what it would cost for that firm to reach this new market segment, the smallholder market, and then design a prize that would essentially cover those initial market entry costs and create, a bit of cushion for them to really invest themselves in reaching that market. And so we then, it's pretty tricky actually, and there's a lot of frankly, like hard kind of numbers that go into, what's the cost to reaching this new segment that goes into designing the prize amount itself. And then we do a lot then to market the prize. We have to often work with the either regional or even national governments to get their, permission or their blessing to issue a prize. It's been confused as gaming or gambling in some arenas. We need to make sure to explain that it's, a development approach and that this is, really go through with local government actors how the prize functions. And so all of that probably costs, it's not an inexpensive part of the project design. I don't have the facts in front of me, but I would say, potentially upwards to 15% or so of a full budget to really be able to design a prize that we have full confidence in that would function.
Well, thank you very much. That just gives, I think, a small taster of the effort that goes into this sort of the market diagnosis and design element. Can I turn to a second sort of area of question that a number of people have expressed interest in, and that is how you define systemic change. It might be useful to go back to the slide actually, which had the AER square on it. So the question we had from one of the participants was, how do you define systemic change and how do you measure that change in your projects? And I think a related question that came in during the course of the presentation from Kabila Wal was, do you look at sort of unforeseen impacts, and particularly where those might be negative ones on the system? I mean, it might be that someone finds a way to achieve the prize, but in a way that is potentially harmful to the development of the system longer term. How do you do, and do you look for that, and how do you deal with that?
Aviva and Parasto, I don't know if you want to come in on that, or I can maybe pick up on how we measure the systemic change.
Yeah, if you wanted to start with the measurement piece, and then
okay.
I may be able to add some. Yeah, great.
Okay, so we use a tool called Structure Conduct Performance in the evaluation framework to understand how firms are behaving, and we use qualitative surveys to do that. So it's a framework which looks at the underlying characteristics of a market in relation to the strategic decisions that the market players, whether those are the businesses, so in the case of Nigeria, the agribusinesses and the aggregators of maize, the smallholder farmers themselves and the consumers, and the decisions that they make about whether and how to engage in the market, and their perspectives on the underlying market conditions. And it's the sort of aggregation of those individual actors' strategies that give rise to the market structure and how that influences market performance. So we do a kind of baseline at the outset, and we formulate hypotheses about expected changes and then do an end-line analysis to see whether that's been supported by the results. So in Nigeria, for example, we're looking at, you know, can you create a smallholder inclusive market for aflatoxin-treated maize, one in which smallholders demand Aflasafe as an input, whether consumers are demanding that clean maize that's free of aflatoxins, and that implementers are able to engage to develop the market for Aflasafe-free or aflatoxin-treated maize, and where eventually the smallholders and the implementers receive that kind of price premium for the clean maize. So if you look at the Nigeria evaluation, it uses that approach and tries to track that and shows in relation to what was the original intention, what proportion of the national maize market is aflatoxin treated. It measures things like the premiums that were going to the aggregators, and then you know, we would hope to go back at a later stage and look at the sustainability of that market and has it sustained beyond the end of the kind of tapered off incentive. I think the other thing to say is that wherever possible, because we're looking for the highest quality of evidence, we've been looking at the opportunities to use RCT type approaches. In Nigeria, that wasn't successful because of the kind of competition environment. The implementers of the aggregators didn't adhere to their kind of treatment plan, and the treatment rate was a little bit low in some of the areas assigned to the treatment. There were all sorts of kind of complexities around using that approach, so we ended up with a quasi-experimental design. But I think because it is so important to understand objectively and have that really rigorous evidence of what those market changes are, we are sort of setting the bar quite high in terms of how you measure that, and we'll look for those opportunities to randomise at the outset, and we'll move down the kind of quality of evidence scale, if you like, after that, if we can't achieve what we want there. But I'll stop and see if Parasto and Aviva want to say more about yeah, that question of other aspects of the design of the systemic change.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. You know, sometimes I think about the AgResults, the prize competition, as really a type of tool for private sector engagement. right? So we have commercial firms that are transacting or interacting with smallholder marketplace. And those fundamentally are, buying and selling relationships. So those are transactions at the heart of it. But how to make those transactions more predictable, expand the geographic scope, make them more accessible to a larger population or group of stockholders that would be, selling into or purchasing goods and services from the commercial actor. So in a way, because the prize is directed toward not just a single firm, but is directed towards many firms, it's almost like a competition where the firms are actually vying for smallholder business in order to achieve the incentive, but also achieve that sustained relationship with those smallholder producers or consumers. And so in that way, I think I'm not answering necessarily the way we measure it, but it's just the theory of utilizing a prize to kind of jumpstart those transactions, but in a way that there's multiple players involved, so they're competing between each other for smallholder business. So I think that's if we are trying to facilitate change within the market, it's really a really interesting tool for development practitioners to consider to be able to really approach a landscape, even in thin markets. If there's multiple actors, or if there's a company that's providing an adjacent good or service that might be able to come into providing the good and service for the technology you're targeting, it's a way to really thicken up the market and bring them into those transactions, hopefully more on a regular and sustained basis.
Thank you very much. There was a question from Philly Desai. Have any of the prizes been gendered, or are they all sort of gender neutral? Have you considered or been able to use any prizes to achieve anything in a sort of from a gender perspective?
That's a great question, and I would want to call out a number of donors. In fact, all of the donors that sit on the AgResults Steering Committee have really prioritized gender in our programming, and I would call out particularly the Government of Canada, who is a steering committee member, constantly pushing us to always, understand in our analysis what are, to really understand as we go through that deep market and value chain analysis, what are the gender implications, both positive and negative, in certain market spaces, and then looking through the prize implementation, what are the outcomes, and then certainly the evaluation that Rachel has gone into certainly considers gender outcomes and impacts. Now, to be very honest, in the first suite of prizes, we have not probably done, as development practitioners, the best job we could have in terms of really considering gender systemically in the first suite of prizes. And so we certainly in the evaluation, there are questions that we seek to answer. The design of the prize has been gender neutral and hasn't taken gender explicitly into account. We are, as Rachel mentioned, we have a pipeline of prizes, and we are explicitly right now considering 2 prize designs that would explicitly, not just the analysis, but explicitly the prize itself may have a component to be able to kind of address for some of the systemic barriers there have been for women to participate on equal footing in the marketplace, or to participate in transactions, or to own and value or to control the resources it takes for production, for marketing, to kind of correct for or try to intervene at some of those levels. And we're looking at a prize right now. It's in design, but it's in East Africa and in the dairy sector, and we're explicitly considering women's participation and access through that prize. So we'll have more to report on and more learning and evidence generated on that, and please do look for that in coming months on the AgResults website. I'm not sure, Rachel or Parasto, if you have anything in addition to add.
No, nothing to add from me, Aviva. Sounds good.
Okay. In that case, with 5 minutes remaining, I've got a third question that was flagged up in advance of the webinar, and that's really about whether there's a tension between prizes creating competition amongst actors in the market and potentially inhibiting collaboration among them. So have you any experience of that happening, and how do you strike the best balance, if you like, between stimulating competition and at the same time encouraging the kind of collaboration that's important to improving the wider environment?
So I will answer this one. We haven't actually, with our prize competitions, seen too much competition created. We're coming in at an early stage, and we're trying to motivate private sector companies to join. So what we've seen with many of our prize competitions is that we're only starting to create that competition. There's still so much that's left to be done when these projects end. And so we haven't seen anything where we've created too much competition. And that's kind of where we determine whether or not an initiative should be implemented in a certain value chain, and using this pay-for-results mechanism, is that the competition isn't there even at a level that is getting the market penetration that we want. And so with none of our projects have we seen too much competition created, but what we have seen is there is the beginnings of collaboration among private sector company entities. I'll use Kenya as an example. We came in and wanted to incentivize the sale of on-farm storage for smallholder farmers, but the standards were not in place to really test to see whether or not the devices in Kenya are hermetic or not. And so we saw that the competitors came together to try to lobby for better policies and better standards for testing. And so what we've seen is the initial partnerships, private sector entities coming together to work together either for the first time or, taking it to a larger scale, trying to influence enabling environment policies. And so we've seen a good balance and really just the beginnings of the collaboration and the beginnings of the competition before we leave or before the project is closed.
I would just add something to emphasize. It really depends on how you're designing the prize as well. And you can design a prize that encourages collaboration among competitors or participants. So instead of a winner-take-all prize, which may in fact be the right type of prize if you're developing a new animal health vaccine, you really only do need that one vaccine from one company, and then you're working through distribution channels and trying to get the vaccine approved through various government bodies. But if you're looking to stimulate some market penetration or reaching new geographic or other areas of the market, and you believe that it's actually multiple actors that can do that at once, you might set your prize at kind of below that you wish to reach, like let's say you wish to reach 100 units, but each actor can only let's say there's 10 actors participating. Each actor can only actually get incentive up to reaching the 10 units, something like that. And so you have actually multiple actors all achieving the same incentive that subsidizes whatever their approach was to reach that target. And so there's not necessarily, you're not necessarily competing for, companies will naturally have already divided some geographic reach or other aspects of the marketplace. And so I just wanted to note that if development practitioners are planning or considering utilizing a prize as a tool for facilitating transactions or relationships between smallholder farmers and for-profit, commercial, private sector businesses that are producing goods or services for those smallholders, to really think about a prize in that you can reach multiple stakeholders at once. And while we are trying to generate, some healthy competition so that firms are utilizing the most efficient and best approaches to reach smallholder market, we still do believe that there's space in a lot of these markets for a lot of growth, for new actors to come in, and a prize can potentially offer that stimulant or incentive for those new companies to enter the market.
Thank you very much. I mean, these are such stimulating answers and such interesting questions. I'm afraid we are running out of time. We have really got to wrap up now. It's been a very interesting presentation. I wish we could have another hour of it. I would like to ask everyone who's listening to do two things. One is, can you please fill out a feedback form, which you'll see a link to in the chat box. Just come up there. Gives us an idea of what you think about the webinar and what we can do to make them better. But the second thing is we have a space, a forum where we can continue these conversations. And if there's an appetite for it from people who are listening, you're very welcome to post your questions and thoughts on what you've heard today in the Beam forum on LinkedIn using the link that you can see there in the chat box. And if, with any luck, if there are some interesting questions there, we can persuade the speakers to carry on the conversation offline through the LinkedIn forum. Otherwise, I just have the honour of thanking Aviva and Rachel and Parasto for a really excellent and really interesting webinar. It's been one of the most stimulating ones that I've heard for a while. And if you're interested in, if you like, the space where these kind of private competitions might be more challenging, we have another webinar in 2 weeks' time about market systems development in shallow markets, and precisely, I guess, in these kind of contexts where prizes might be quite challenging. So that would be an interesting contrast, and I hope maybe some of the AgResults speakers can come and listen to that and offer your advice about how market systems development in these kind of more shallow market environments might learn from what you've achieved. So anyway, thank you very much, everyone. And a final word to the speakers, if they would like to say anything.
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for participating and really knowing that this is a multi-donor effort. And so really we're experimenting in this new space, trying to gather evidence and provide information for ourselves as well as the entire industry on, really when this tool, this pay for results, prize, competition, incentive tool makes sense as one of the quivers in our toolbox to really transform markets, to be more inclusive and to be more equitable and to grow through agriculture-led growth to reach our food security, health, and nutrition objectives. And so if you are considering, or if you have an active prize in a food security, animal health program, we'd love to hear about it. Please do contact us through the website, and we'd be glad to continue this conversation. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, and we'll close down there. Have a great day, everyone.